Hey, if you enjoy this video and want to have a hand in choosing the next trope to discuss, then consider joining my Patreon, where you can vote in the next Unpacking Queer Tropes topic, starting at just $1 a month. Alright, on with the show. Quick! You're writing a romance and your straight male lead with a heart of gold and a track record of putting his foot in his mouth, let's call him Hunter for short, has just done the inevitably unthinkable and upset his lady love interest just in time for the third act breakdown, and now he doesn't know what he could possibly do to fix the biggest mistake of his life and win back the girl of his dreams. But who else should sweep in to save the day than his gay best friend Avery, the fabulously sassy and world-wise queen of their friend group who always knows just what to say and, though we've never seen him so much as mention being in a relationship, knows exactly what must be done and tells Hunter in no uncertain terms to get off his ass and tell that girl he loves her, saving the day and doing it in style. In much the same way that the trope of the magical Negro exists to dispense wisdom and fix the life of the white main character, and the manic pixie dream girl exists to liven up the male lead's life by introducing him to love he didn't know existed, the magical queer exists largely to act as a font of sassy life advice to the straight leads of the story, usually in regards to relationships, despite never having been in a relationship with a woman, and also seemingly with no real interest in pursuing a gay relationship either. It's worth noting that this trifecta serve as sub-tropes to the supertrope known as Closer to Earth, which really deserves its own video someday, but for now I'll just link to it down below so I can stay on topic. This trope is kind of a weird one, because when it's played straight, the queer character in question is largely coded as being wiser because of their queerness, and not because of their life experiences or history of discrimination or some third thing. They may note that they've faced discrimination in the past, but it tends to be portrayed as more incidental than anything else. It's also important to note that while sometimes the queer character in question actually has magical powers, the trope itself refers to their status as dispensers of wisdom and advice, not the idea that they are literally magical. The trope also has some overlap with the gay best friend trope, which I'll cover in its own video someday. The idea behind the magical queer seems to stem from the desire to portray gay characters in a more positive light, but it also kind of suffers from the same problems as the other two Closer to Earth archetypes, in that it can at best come off as kind of patronizing or even just straight up offensive, and at worst it can portray them as being too good for the sinful earth and leading to them being killed off, often as a form of gay Aesop and to facilitate the character development of the straight leads, which is just plain bad. It tends to involve a campy gay man or a drag queen who sees things as they are and speaks the truth people need to hear but don't want to, but in the rare case of a mostly gay male cast, the magical queer might be the token lesbian instead, though like I said, this is very rare. See, there are two main issues with this trope, the first of which being that in its original form, it relies on the stereotype that men are uncultured, emotionally stunted children that require a hand to hold to get them to put their egos aside for their own good, and that women are unfocused messes of hormones and contradictions that require a guide to prevent them from destroying the chances at romance with their unchecked emotions. And since it was pretty common to depict homosexuals as either falling somewhere between men and women in terms of emotional intelligence, or just straight up being the best of both worlds in a way, the logic seemed to be that the gays are the only ones qualified to direct their hetero counterparts to their happy endings. The other main problem with this trope is that it also tends to deprive the audience of the ability to empathize with the characters, because there's kind of nothing to them. This is an issue that basically all Closer to Earth archetypes suffer from, in that they're portrayed as being the only truly rational thinker in the whole of the cast, and therefore having no struggles of their own, no flaws, and quite honestly, no real personality or presence in the story outside of the utility to the main characters. And I think it's because of these issues with the trope that you tend to see it subverted more often than not in modern times, if it's used at all. The trope has kind of fallen out of favour as people have grown more comfortable, actually writing queer characters. That isn't to say that it doesn't pop up at all though. King of the Hill has at least two different instances of this trope popping up, both of which were subversions of some kind, and more often than not this trope tends to pop up by accident when people just don't flesh out their queer characters enough. Because that's kind of the thing, queer characters that are fully fleshed out and written to be actual characters don't really fit into this trope because there's more to them than just being a utility. You can have queer characters that are generally wiser, more experienced, or smarter than other characters and who also tend to have all the answers, but you only really have a problem if they're reduced to just that role. I think a good example of this kind of problem would actually be Garnet from Steven Universe in later seasons, because there are quite a few episodes where her role is essentially just to either explain fusion or to solve a problem that crops up with it, like when Peridot asks why she's permafused or in Here Comes the Thought. These tend to be short instances and she gets a good amount of development and care overall, but it is a little jarring when she's reduced to just being the resident expert on fusion for an episode. And here's the thing, I think you actually can put this trope in your story or game without it being a problem, and it largely comes down to a matter of role and numbers. If you just have the one queer character in the plot and this is what they do, then you've done a bad job of it. But if you have other fully fleshed out queer characters and simply designate a minor character amongst them to be the chosen fulfiller of this trope, then it creates much less of an issue. Avery should have more going on than just fixing Hunter's problems. Even if he's a side character you made specifically to fulfill that function, the audience should never feel like he exists only to serve that purpose. Also, you'll notice I keep saying the magical queer instead of the magical gay, and that's because the role has kind of opened up to more than just gay men and lesbians. It used to be that you would only get gay men in the role, and honestly this trope is pretty much the basis for the idea behind the Queer Eye shows, but now as the trope has been iterated on and deconstructed a bit, you're also likely to see bisexual, trans, or even asexual people in the role. But what's funny is that there is some basis in reality to this trope, but not in the way you might initially think. Queer people can actually be an incredible font of insight for the non-queers, but it's not because being queer makes us inherently wiser, it's due to the difference in perspective. The thing about being queer is that, even as LGBT people become more accepted and normalized by cis-hetero society, we still exist outside of certain cultural norms, and that outside existence gives us a perspective on things that those within don't normally tend to have. There are some things you're just raised to believe are normal. Expectations for the way the world and relationships and people are supposed to work, and these presumptions don't tend to get questioned by people who operate within that group of so-called normals. So the introduction of an outside perspective from someone who doesn't just accept that it's the way things are, and questions norms that you've been conditioned not to wonder about, can make it seem like the person who does question it is somehow far wiser, or a special kind of in the know, when the reality is that they just operate on a different level of accepted norms than you do. I have been the magical queer to both friends and co-workers in the past, and it largely comes down to the fact that I was looking at things from a way they weren't and asked questions they never did. I have had people look at me in a whole new light before, and it all stemmed from the fact that I just thought a different way because my lived experience is so much different. There is a serious benefit to understanding the perspectives of people who live different lives than you do. And this extends even to other LGBT people. A trans or non-binary person will see things differently from a cisgender person. A bi or pan person will have a different perspective than a monosexual person. And asexual or aromantic people will probably ask questions and interrogate supposed norms that an allosexual and alloromantic person would never think to consider. At the end of the day, we are all just human, all struggling with our limited understandings of the world around us. So looking at things with fresh eyes can end up revealing more to you than you ever thought possible, so long as you stay open to it. So to summarize, the magical queer is a trope that has some basis in reality, but requires you to really think about how you're writing your characters and the roles you assign to them. And if you're really interested in giving both yourself and your readers a new perspective on the issue that your main characters are facing, consider asking someone with a far different perspective about it. You might just be surprised what you learn. So, yeah,